right. What's up, good people? Hope everybody's well. Looks like we got a good sized group coming in today. So far, 98 people. That's what's up. Make sure you hit the like button, please. I'm understanding that YouTube is acting different these days, so I guess we need more interaction for it to register. So please make sure you do that. If nothing else, y'all know the deal. Also, like, share, subscribe, join, and donate for the channel if you can, so we can continue to bring you this independent Black male thought. So anything you can contribute would be helpful. You can see it on the screen: Patreon, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. I don't know what's going on. That's weird. Kind of trying to deal with it. So, man, I'm messing with some of StreamYard's new features. So y'all forgive me as I kind of trudge through. Tend to like to, test this stuff live. So it's going. Shout out to everybody that's come through. I'm not going to be able to read everybody, but I'm going to try and catch a number of names because I'm not trying to keep y'all all night. But what's up, Inspirational Truth, Chef Mike, Ahmed, Mark, as usual, appreciate that. Malika in the house. What's up, good brother? Hope you're well. Let's see here. Very little. Appreciate the information drop as usual. Thank you very much. We are broadcasting live on innerlightradio.com, as well as Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, and of course, YouTube. So like, share, subscribe, join, and donate, do the whole deal. And you can become a member of the YouTube channel or a member of the Patreon, or I should say, and by becoming a patron on Patreon, you can check us out when we do our live film reviews on the 1st and 15th, as well as support the Institute for Black Male Studies. I'm actually transferring it. I shut down the website because I'm transferring it to Patreon for the Institute. So it still exists. I'm just in the process of transferring it. And I just got to make sure I finish it out. So yeah, so support if you can. We'll continue to go from there. But we are on innerlightradio.com. So if you have not checked it out, please do so. It is Black owned, kind of an internet radio station. Shout out to Brother Jamal. Hope you're well. Let's see here. Now, we got Arena in here. We got Established, XIX89. Was that 1989? Let's see. Electrician, what's up? The Arena, Eugene, Big Op. Let's see, Accidental, Ari, Indigo, what's up, Indigo? AB in the house, what's up, AB? Inspiration. Shout out to Dark Power and Greg for the donations on Cash App, much appreciated. Ghetto User, what's going on? Let's see, we got Max, Shadow, M1, Alongo, let's see, Michael, Chaos, what's up? LXST, what's happening? Blood Crow, Black Males, GRP, Sir, what's going on? Floyd, what's up? Okay, so Floyd says, make sure to let people know, your followers know that YouTube is unsubscribing people. I had to resubscribe and turn the notifications back on. Well, much appreciated for doing so. Please make sure you're still subscribed, or if you haven't, subscribe. Pistol Pete, what's going on? This is working on a presentation for my marital counseling class about domestic violence. Okay, bi-directional and proxy violence. That's what's up. Discipline, what's happening, man? Hope I'll see you in a couple of nights. What are we? We got the 12th. So in 3 days, which is Saturday night, we will be doing another film review. Let's see what film we're actually going to be touching on. So this is November. Okay. I think we're looking at Brian Banks this Saturday night. But I'm also have to start putting back some films that are likely going to piss me off, so we can get some criticism in there. We've been watching films that fall right in line with our interests, which is not bad, but we're going to have to mix it up. So I'm thinking of putting in How Stella Got a Groove back in sometime soon. So y'all let me know for my patrons if that's something you're interested in seeing. What's up, Hitflix? Let me see. Okay, so Jamal says lower background a bit. Okay, I hope that helps. All right. All right, where are we at here? Oh, no, it just skipped me around. All right. Eugene Galen, what's up? Got Damien. All right. Shout out to Samuel Jenkins. Much appreciating that. Says finally caught a live. I know it's been crazy. The last one I didn't even drop a notification. I just hit live and just started going. Magnificent. Appreciate that support. Thank you. Let's see. Mogul, what's up? Mr. GQ. Let's see here. It says, okay. All right. Through. Cellulite, Kiel. That's what's up. All right. Oh, man. Discipline talking about Woman King. Yeah, you're right. I need to put that to the list. We need to chop that up. I already did a review, but not a live review, so we need to do that. Let's see. Okay. All right, so it looks like we kind of caught up there. All right, 179 in the building. Again, support the channel if you will. So a couple things. Let me see, just to kind of get back on track. I've been kind of in and out lately. Still teaching the full load, grading papers, doing the whole deal. I had a procedure last week. Yeah, had to have a procedure. And they were, how do I put this? They had to test me to see if I qualified for a surgery. So they do a procedure to see if it works. What they're trying to do is block the nerves in my hip, or both hips really, to see if it can cut the pain so I can move. So they did the procedure, which is basically a light version of that. And they take a very long needle, or actually a couple of them, and yeah, they put it right in your groin, straight down, straight into your hip, and block the nerves. And it turns out it worked well. The last week I've been moving around. It's actually been a week as of today. Yeah, I'm moving around quite well, which means that in December or January, they're going to give me the full procedure as far as that's concerned, and go from there. So I can go back to the gym once that happens. So that's kind of one of the things that's been going on. And it's been a crazy little ride up to that. Other than that, all is well. Can't complain. But I thought we could delve into this. BGS covered this not long ago, or not. I don't know if it was the same video, but he covered it. The subject. Okay, they're not. Hold on. All right, this is tripping. There we go. Need to do it that way. All right. Yeah. So, yeah. Shout out Passport. What's good? Yeah. So he covered the same subject, and a number of us have, and I think we should, because I think it's important. This is brought to us by conservative Helen Andrews, and she has been, tearing social media up lately with this whole question of feminization, and I appreciate it. She's given us some new ground to kind of cover on certain in a certain way. I would say we've kind of been moving in that direction for quite a while. So this is not necessarily entirely new information for us for us in this circle, but the way she's covering it is useful, and she's actually doing it on a larger stage. So appreciate that, Malika. Thank you. But yeah, she's doing it on a larger stage, and it's helping us to have a bigger conversation. But as you could tell from the title, I make the argument that Black men are not new to this, right? We are not new to this at all. As far as we're concerned, as far as I'm concerned, Black men are definitely the canaries in the coal mine. We have been experiencing feminization as a society for a number of decades now, and it has been snowballing. But I think the Black community finds itself ahead of the curve, so to speak. Shout out to Barry. Put this up. Thank you for that. Buki, what's going on, man? But yeah, Black men have been ahead of the curve on this question. We've had to deal with it in a different way, because as a smaller community, as a micro community in comparison, so to speak, the whole question of feminization has already been put into play, and we've been grappling with that, right? And so that's one of the things, even though we use our own language, we've been talking about the gynocracy for years now, and I think it's important that we do. But feminization is operating on multiple planes. We can talk about it as it relates to our immediate environment. We can also talk about it on the larger scale. And this is what Helen Andrews is doing, right? She's talking about it on the larger scale. And she's dealing with especially white women's interests, but obviously this impacts all of us at one level or another, because we're seeing whole industries, whole institutions, whole environments, right, shifting in their culture. And in doing so, taking on the value sets of mostly liberal white women is really where most of it is kind of coming from, which is why it doesn't surprise me that it's a conservative white woman that's actually raising the question about the efficacy of feminization. How useful is it? What are the long-term impacts? BMI, what's up, man? Hope you're well, good brother. Let me know if you want to come up, chop this up with me. We're going to go through one of her talks, kind of, stop and dialogue on the way. So if you want to pop up, man, let me know. Let's see. OGB Gaming, what's up? Says, get Dr. T's book. It belongs in the school for boys and teens, especially Black boys. Hey, appreciate that, man. Thank you. Yeah, so that said, we need to deal with it, because we've been experiencing the culture shift. But here's the gaslighting. Nobody would admit to it, right? And if you tried to point it out, you would be labeled a misogynist and dismissed in a certain respect. But this shift in the culture, especially if it's not productive, is a problem. The only time you can really bring it up, and I think Helen Andrews speaks to this, is when you're complimenting it, when you're suggesting and lauding it. When you're suggesting it's a good thing, then it's acceptable. But if you have criticisms, then you're inherently a misogynist, and it's a problem, right? So we're going to look a little bit at how she breaks this down. So let me go ahead and add this up here. Fair use. I usually don't play live videos, but I see a lot of people doing it, so hopefully YouTube will not shut me down for doing so. Let's see. Yep. There you go. Yeah. All right. So yeah, let's deal with it. Let me go ahead and start it up. So this is this was posted about a month ago. This one is about 17 minutes long. I've seen longer ones. I didn't really want to delve into those just yet. And I probably will deal with some of Scott Galloway's latest posts. But I wanted to do it after Helen, because I think what Scott does is he's a bit disingenuous about the shift in the environment. So I think feminization is a useful tool for breaking into that conversation, because Scott likes to basically say, it's men's fault because they're just not keeping up, and they're giving up, and they're weak, and they're this and that, and they just need to accept it. But women are doing great, and they're ascending the ladder, and it's beautiful, and we should all applaud. And I really don't like his approach, because what he's fundamentally doing is he's begging. He's begging essentially white liberals to share some resources, allow for resources to extend to boys and men. So he's doing a lot of that. And I think the posture of it is already problematic. So he's not being full-throated about what's really going on with boys and men. So I think feminization is an excellent on-ramp to kind of come at Scott Galloway's arguments, knowing full well, right, that the platform we're all standing on has been shifting. And as much as he wants to tap dance around it, we can deal with it, right? So here is Helen Andrews, Overcoming the Feminization of Culture.
The libertarian economist Tyler Cowen once wrote a blog post describing all of the revolutions he's seen in the course of his lifetime, starting with the moon landing when he was a little boy and going up chronologically to today's advent of AI. And there were only 7 revolutions on this list, because this was only the greatest and most earth-shaking ones. And right there, between the fall of communism and the invention of the internet, was something called the Great Feminization. That is not a phrase that a lot of Americans know, but future historians may well rank it as having greater importance than almost any other revolution on that list. The Great Feminization is very easy to define. It refers to the increasing representation of women in all of the institutions of our society. But as simple as it is to define, it's very difficult for those of us on the other side of that revolution to fully grasp its significance.
Now, I want to say, jumping right out the gate, when she says it's kind of a significant revolution of sorts, it reminds me of Bill Burr on Saturday Night Live talking about how generals need to study how white women have done this. And essentially, even though he was talking about a very specific issue, but both are right. And they're really speaking to the same thing in a certain respect. Right? This revolution that's taken place. And this is the thing, as men, particularly in the West, we've all been witness to it, because it's an interesting kind of cultural and political revolution that incorporated different groups of women who didn't need to be formally educated, who did not need to ever read a book on feminism. They were actually able to recruit them, right? And we witnessed this in the Black community, right? In the 1980s. And obviously, Black feminism starts to really make some waves in the 1970s, and it's progressing from there. But even as early as the 1980s, I saw women who'd never gone to college, who couldn't tell you who bell hooks was, but they had been recruited in a certain respect. Now, this whole emphasis on advancing women wouldn't and didn't have to be a problem in and of itself. What made it problematic, especially for Black men, is that it was linked to this notion that Black male studies refers to as anti-Black misandry. Right? In other words, it didn't have to be a problem unto itself until it linked itself up to misandry. So it was more than advancing women. It became a simultaneously attack and dismissal of men. Right? Men became the problem. Men became the focal point. Men became those that needed to be competed with and downed. And it didn't matter. And this is where Black male studies makes an intervention. It didn't matter which group of men. It didn't matter what their class backgrounds were, what their occupations were, what their educational level was. It didn't matter if they were abused. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. It was the fact that they had penises. That was the extent of it. And because it was such a superficial, one-dimensional approach to defining manhood and thus dismissing and attacking it at the same time, that made it problematic. But here you have this kind of widespread feminist revolution that advanced, so to speak, women at the expense of men in many respects, without actually having to educate or recruit them. Now, you did have some media influence that played a role, but for the most part, you saw it taking place on every level. It took place, in the boardrooms. It took place in wherever women were in larger numbers. You saw this push to advance women, right? And it's interesting how it didn't even need to be really widely discussed. We saw it happen. I saw it happen with my little sister. I saw it happen with the women in my family. I saw it happen in schools. I saw all of it at the same time. It was like a wave. Let me see. Sir John said he lost audio. Hold on. Can you guys hear me? Put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me okay. Just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So I'm not sure what that was. All right. So yeah, so in that respect, this kind of tidal wave was a slow rising wave until it really kind of crescendoed. And she's dealing with the crescendo, but most of us grew up watching it happen. And it was interesting to see it happen. And when it kind of turned on us. Now, this is, if you're talking about the Black community, this is in the 1980s, most particularly, when it became widespread and public, to really push for Black women's advancement. And that was the same exact moment you started to hear niggas ain't shit. That was the moment you started to hear you need to make 6 figures to earn my time. You started to hear music like that. I mean, Eddie Murphy talked about it in Rod. You got to have a job to deal with me. This kind of cultural rise of Black women was simultaneously tied to, the detriment of Black men in the community, in media especially. And they told the world, right, we were monsters. They had Steven Spielberg directing films for the world to consume, telling the world that we are monsters, abusers, rapists, the whole deal. So their advancement was simultaneously tied to our detriment, right? And at the same time, they didn't need any coordinated classes. They didn't have to join the military. It's interesting how this little cultural revolution took place without much influence. But let's continue.
The first thing that most people fail to understand about it is how unprecedented it is in human history. There have been many societies that have been feminist to one degree or another, in which women have been queens and owned businesses and held positions of authority that commanded the respect of men. But there has never been a society in which women hold as much political power as they do today. Think of all of the parliaments that have ever existed, every legislature in every country and every century. None of them has been, as ours is, 1/3 female. The idea of a female chief of police would have seemed very strange even to many early feminists, and yet today the police department is led by a woman in the largest city in America and in the city in which we are now standing. Law schools today are majority female. Law firm associates are majority female. Medical schools are majority female. Women earn a majority of BAs and PhDs.
And this is definitely true. There's no university that I've been to since undergrad where there weren't more women than men. Most particularly, y'all know I deal with the Black Academy, right? So just in terms of that, there were always more women than men. Always. I've never been to a university that didn't, unless you're talking about like Morehouse. But short of that, there were always more women than men in every environment that we were in, that I've been in, as far as that. So I've definitely seen this kind of this thing advancing, while at the same time villainizing men at every turn. But there was something else she said a moment ago that it'll probably come back to me, damn it. But here we go. So I'll let it continue and it'll come back.
College faculty are majority female. Women are 46% of the managers in the United States, and the white-collar workforce overall, workers with college degrees, a majority of them are women. These are, in many cases, very recent developments, with the tipping point having occurred only in the last 5 to 10 years. And that is...
Now, see, that's what I mean when I say we're the canaries in the coal mine, because we experienced this much earlier. I can tell you, even in the early 90s, we started to notice, like, to be honest with you, my sister got a job when she was, I think, technically still in high school, when I was in college, and it paid more than anything I could get. I remember the girls that I was going to school with, who would, because we were all struggling, for the most part. So when we would all go out to get jobs, the guys were getting jobs that were like lifting boxes, you know what I mean? But women could get office jobs that paid much more than we had, right? They were actually getting paid enough to actually go get apartments off campus. Like, I've seen this happening on various levels, but there wasn't a coordinated place for us to compare notes. So we all kind of saw it, but you almost kind of just thought it was not necessarily happening to you, but you just thought, well, okay, maybe that's just the few that I see. But it wasn't until, about the last decade where I've noticed when men started comparing notes, we all saw the same things happening at the same time, right? And she's talking about how this is happening in the last 5 years, but we noticed it much earlier. Because when you're in a community that doesn't have, easy access to resources, we don't have an inherited wealth, when there is a surplus of resources available for any demographic, it's that much more apparent and easier to see. Right? Yeah. So, here we go. Let her continue.
Is the other common misconception about the Great Feminization. People tend to think of feminism as something that occurred back in the 1970s, but it took several decades to go from token representation to approximate gender parity. The first woman on the Supreme Court was appointed in 1981, and in that year, women were 5% of the judges in America. Today, there are, of course, 4 women on the court, 1 justice away from a female majority, and women are 30% of the judges in America, 40% of the judges in the state of California, and 63% of the judges appointed by President Joe Biden. So from the first woman on the court to a likely female majority on the Supreme Court is probably going to be a span of about 50 years. And the exact same trajectory over the same timeline can be seen in many other professions.
Exactly. And that's why, we're kind of talking about it as a casual revolution of sorts, but it's an incredible thing to happen in a very short period of time.
There was a pioneering generation in the 1970s where a woman was often the only female reporter in her newsroom or the only female professor in her department, and then increasing female representation through the 80s and 90s until a healthy female representation of about 20 to 30% by the turn of the century. And today, 25 years later, in many of these fields, they are now 40% female or 50-50 gender equal. And the pendulum may not be done swinging yet. As feminized as we are, we may get more feminized still. Look at the example of the profession of psychology. As recently as 25 years ago, psychology was a predominantly male profession, up to 70% male. Today, the youngest cohort of psychologists just joining the profession, 20% male. Men have evacuated the profession of psychology. And it's easy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is why when we start talking about therapy, whether it's, marital therapy, individual therapy, you have to claw through it to find men often. You have to claw through it. And I get a lot of people that ask me, can you help me find a Black male therapist? Yeah, it's not easy, right? So she's definitely right. The field in and of itself, she's saying, is 80% female. Scott Galloway has argued, and I think actually it was his boy who argued that it's actually probably going to be over 95 within the next decade. His name escapes me. But anyway, let's continue.
To understand why. It's because psychology has become feminized. As women increased their representation in the profession, they reoriented the field to be more friendly to their ideas and preferences, to be about caring and empathy and non-judgmentalism. So a man who wanted to become a psychologist because he liked judging other people would naturally choose a different profession.
Yeah, she says that, the feminine qualities associated with feminization are about caring and whatnot. It's a very particular performance of caring. And it's very much tied to who's allowed to perform it, right? There's part of a hierarchy that you can actually, kind of tie to intersectionalism or intersectionality in a certain kind of way. But there are only certain people allowed to perform it and be received and acknowledged as such. So it's not just that there's some kind of heavier emphasis on caring. There's a particular performance. It's almost ritualistic in a certain way, but it's tightly connected to who gets to do it, who's accepted as doing it, and so on and so forth. So it kind of goes from there.
The same thing has occurred in literary fiction. Some of you may have read in the last 12 months one of several articles in the New York Times about how men don't read novels anymore. And the explanation why, which is very obvious to me, even if it's not obvious to the New York Times, is that the publishing industry is overwhelmingly female, almost 80% female. So men do still like to read novels. They just don't like to read the kinds of novels that today's publishing industry produces.
Now, she's absolutely right. And that publishing shift that she's talking about is one of the reasons I came to YouTube. I literally stopped publishing for about 5 years. And as an academic, that's a no-go. That's considered, career suicide. But I'm at a teaching university, so that's one thing. There's less of an emphasis on publications. And I went there on purpose because I wanted to work with students like I was coming out of high school. So I was there at a teaching university for a reason. But I pulled out of publishing because the things I wanted to publish were constantly getting denied. Because, and I talked to publishers, they would tell me directly, the reason we won't do this is that we find it would offend our female readers. That was their primary concern. And it wasn't like I was just calling on, going off, fuck these. It wasn't nothing like that. It was simply because I was raising questions about feminism. And more importantly, I was targeting men, Black men to be specific, but men in general to talk about. And that in and of itself was considered a problem. So when I stopped, I didn't stop writing, kept writing. So I had papers. I actually have 2 books on my hard drive, but I couldn't get anything published. And I remember one editor was like, well, I'll publish your article, but allow me to rewrite it. And he wanted to rewrite it down to the charts, the data in the charts that I was producing. He wanted to change the data in the charts so it wouldn't be as offensive. Now, she's going to talk about this to an extent where she talks about feelings. She talks about, how being offended or being made to feel uncomfortable or not liking something somehow gets tied to some sense of truth and right and wrong and what should happen and what shouldn't happen. Feelings get advanced to a greater degree. But this is essentially what publishers were telling me. Right? Because someone might not like what you have to say, they may feel bad reading it, we can't publish you. So I stopped for about 5 years and I came to YouTube, and I was looking for a group of people that I could carry this discussion on with, because I couldn't find it in the academy. Most men were seeing it seeing the same things, but they were terrified of losing their careers, terrified of being fired. Most of us work in predominantly female environments, or at least half, depending on your field. So nobody in the academy really wanted to touch this, but a handful of brothers that would later be termed under Black male studies. That's when I ran into some of these cats. We were all kind of doing this work, but many of us were very isolated, right? And so, coming to YouTube, I found this collection of men having this dialogue, but I don't even really think I heard a name for it at that time. But that's how bad it was. So when she's talking about the publishing company, understand what that means in and of itself. That means that there were works that never got to see the light of day because they were basically blocking it to prevent people from having their feelings hurt. Right? There's a kind of censorship taking place long before we were starting to have these conversations on men, and they're still villainizing it, right? Because anytime the conversation of men comes up, first thing they jump to is Andrew Tate and whatever fabrication they have about men and on online spaces. It has to be the worst thing they've ever imagined. But the reality is, all of this was a response. It was a response to a censorship that prevented us from being able to dialogue or publish information relevant to our experiences. So here she goes.
Some fields are more susceptible to feminization than others. There's very little you can do to feminize the field of math or engineering. But as women join a field in greater numbers, we should expect that any field that can be feminized will be, and the dynamic will play out exactly as it has in psychology. It may be that a 50-50 gender split is not a stable equilibrium. I have referred several times so far to feminization without defining what that means. I'll have a lot to say about it in just a moment. But if you want to put it in a single sentence, you could say that feminization equals wokeness. Everything you think of as wokeness is simply an epiphenomenon of demographic feminization. Think about all the things that wokeness means. Valuing empathy over rationality, safety over risk, conformity and cohesion over competition and hierarchy. All of these things are privileging the feminine over the masculine. So
now, I need to be careful here with this because, when especially conservative whites start talking about wokeness, they throw a lot of things into that pot, right? They will throw all things related to race. They will throw all things related to, they'll throw a lot in there, so we may be thinking on this channel, and those who support my show, we may be looking at this whole question from a gendered angle as related to women and Black women in particular. But to conservative whites, even when you start to talk about race, when you start to talk about the impact on race, and I know there are many conservative Black men in this space, but don't get it twisted. We know the history of race. We have grandfathers. We have family members. We know, if you dig back far enough, there are stories about people in your family who may have been lynched. This is not a fantasy. It's something you just imagine as a Black male. You understand the legacy. You understand the history. It's very real. But when you're talking to people like this, you have to be careful and you have to qualify for what they consider woke to be. See, I don't consider conversations about Black men and racism as part of what it means to be woke. And she's not going into great detail, but I'm just saying in terms of the larger conservative conversation, they may include that. You know what I mean? And you notice it, but like even in the last few years, when you saw these conversations about films and Mary Sueism and the problems, say, for example, with Marvel, you noticed it when they would throw, Black characters in with the critique on feminism in films, right? That wasn't always linked in the same way, but in the conservative white mind, it is.
if you have ever wondered why wokeness appeared out of nowhere when it did, that is my hypothesis, that all of the institutions that began admitting women in the 1970s eventually got enough women that they were able to reorient them. For example, women are consistently less supportive of free speech than men in surveys asking which is more important, protecting free speech or preserving an inclusive society. Approximately 2/3 of men say free speech, and approximately 2/3 of women say inclusive society. In moral reasoning, the traditional way of phrasing the difference between men and women is to say that women have an ethics of caring and men have an ethics of justice. In making a moral judgment, men will ask, what are the rules and what are the facts? Women tend to be more interested in context and relationships. So let's apply that to wokeness. When James Damore wrote his famous, or I should say notorious memo for Google, arguing that female underrepresentation in the hard sciences might not be the result of bias and prejudice, no one even attempted to argue that he was wrong on the facts. The reason that he was fired was because the things he had written might make his female coworkers feel bad.
See, there we go. There we go, right there. And this is taking place to men all across the world, especially across the country, right? When you're at your job, you're careful on what you say because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Now, and it's encroached even into interactions, right? It's unheard of now to compliment a woman's dress or hair or any of that because we're very concerned about how that may be used and weaponized, right, against us. But part of acknowledging how these things can be weaponized against us is an admission that we recognize that feminization is taking place, because this wasn't the case not long ago, and now it's like a minefield if you choose to even engage in that. Right? So she's dead on when she talks about this, but we just have to make sure we qualify for our experiences as Black men, because there are going to be some deviations that take place. But the overall thrust of her argument is dead on.
Or consider the Kavanaugh hearings. The masculine position was to say that maybe something bad happened to you, but if you do not have evidence, then we can't allow you to ruin a man's life and career over it. The feminine position was to say, how can you talk about rules of evidence? Can't you see she's crying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I call it a coup of feelings. This is what men have been dealing with in the environments they've been in. I taught a class some years ago at another university, not at Fresno State. And I've told this story before, but I usually teach, when I teach Intro to Africana Studies, when I get to the gender portion, right, I start with, I try to do it in chronological order. So I start with feminism, and then I talk about Black feminism, I talk about womanism, and then I get to Black men. But at the time, I hadn't refined my information on Black men. I hadn't called it anything. I was still feeling it out. So all I had were stats on Black males. So we got through feminism and they loved it. We got through womanism and they had questions, right? But they couldn't question it too much because I had a Black woman come present that, so they couldn't. If I did it, it would have been an argument. She did it, and so they accepted it begrudgingly, right? But by the time we get to Black men, I didn't say anything. I posted stats on Black male homelessness. Posted, of course, incarceration rates, cancer rates, HIV rates. I just posted information. That's all. I didn't even say anything. I had PowerPoint slides. I let them read the slides. Not long after that, they went to the dean to complain. They said I created an unsafe environment and they felt under threat physically by me, right? I didn't say anything. I just posted statistics. That was all I did. They were offended. And just like she's talking about, how dare you put this information up? How dare you question this? Look how it's making us feel. So this is what I mean by a coup of feelings. Men kind of just hit this wall all of a sudden where your everyday environment and your career depended on how you navigated this new minefield of feelings, right? And it got even worse when you start to look at cases of accusations of rape on college campuses, because many of the universities had their own courts, so to speak, to determine right and wrong, guilt or innocence, and they didn't include law enforcement, right? And so in many of those environments, evidence took a back seat to somebody crying. And this is what men were trying to respond to, but they were relegated and dismissed as misogynistic if they were critical of this process, right? If you voiced criticism about how universities were handling this, you were just purely misogynistic. But what a lot of men were trying to say was, if you don't have any evidence and you're going to kick somebody out of school, you're going to send them to prison if possible over feelings, right? That becomes a problem unto itself, right? So here we go.
Now, to be clear, many women were revolted by the way the Kavanaugh hearings played out. In fact, the very best book on the Kavanaugh hearings was written by two women, Molly Hemingway and Carrie Severino. But a political system in which men predominate will tend to operate according to rules of facts and objectivity, and one in which women predominate will tend to operate by the rules of emotions and subjective facts, so even if there are individual men and women who fall on the opposite side of those camps. There's a lot more that could be said about sex differences and wokeness, but I'll skip ahead to the controversial part of my argument. Because believe it or not, nothing I've said so far has been particularly controversial. So far, I have only made two claims. One, men and women are different. And two, as institutions become more female, they change in predictable ways according to those differences. I think even most people on the left would agree with that. Feminization is a great example of what Michael Anton calls the celebration parallax, which is a fancy term for anything where you're only allowed to notice something if you think it's a good thing. There are literally thousands of articles out there saying it's great that we have more women judges now because women are more empathetic, or it's good to have more women on corporate boards because that'll make capitalism more humane. It is only when you say women are fundamentally changing the bedrock institutions of our society, and that might be bad, that you start to get into trouble.
And she's talking about this getting into trouble as a middle-aged white woman, right? So imagine what Black men have dealt with trying to have this conversation, especially within the Black community, because usually when you're trying to make these appeals, you're often making it to a council of Black women when you're trying to suggest that something is unfair that has taken place on gender terms against men. This is dismissed, right? This is dismissed. And it's because we've grown up in an environment where we experience things a little differently. I'll give you an example while we can. Let me hold on. Bear with me a bit. Wasn't planning to do this, but I think it speaks to what we're talking about. All right. Yeah, Facebook. Hopefully you guys will be able to hear this okay. So Justin Edwards, this is an NBA interview. Check this out.
You remember what you yelled, or is that just, did you just kind of...
like I know, but if he say he gonna get a beating.
Well, yeah, she knows. Let's freaking go.
I'll let it play again.
Remember what you yelled, or is that just, did you just kind of... like
I know, but if he say he gonna get a beating.
Right. So the newscaster or the interviewer asked him, does he remember what he said on the court? And I guess his mother, but you could definitely tell it was a Black woman, said, it's more than likely his mother, said, he better not say it, he's going to get a beating. Now, this is a grown-ass man. Now, obviously, there was a degree of humor at play, but the reality is this type of emasculization, emasculization, this type of infantilization can take place with Black men, particularly with Black mothers, because again, we have a particular kind of engagement. We have a Black Gynocracy. Most particularly, we saw its rise with Gen X, because we were the generation most raised by single mothers. And what single mothers were able to do was socialize boys into subservience and redefine the roles of men and women, redefine the very notion of what Black women and Black men were in ways that could not be done in two-parent households on a wider scale. And this is one of the reasons that we're further along than other groups as it pertains to us being canaries in the coal mine, because we grew up in environments where this was normalized, right? The idea that your job is to serve. And what Black women did is they taught you to serve them, and they prepared you to serve whoever you might marry down the line. Right? This type, we were conditioned. We were conditioned in a very particular way, right, to kind of do this. Now, what Helen Andrews is talking about is on a much wider scale. And there was something, kind of looked at it a certain way. I think I might have misplaced it. But there's, in other words, Helen Andrews deals with a larger scale in the sense that she's really talking about a kind of social engineering, social terraforming, if you will, that's taken place on a large scale. But we went through this much earlier. And for us, it came through households. It came through Black mothers. And it came through the conditioning we got. So you're at a point where a grown man playing for the NBA can have his mother threaten to spank him, and everybody thinks it's cute and it's funny. Have you ever seen any other group of people do this to their men? You ever see any other group of men conditioned to accept it? The first person that needs to check this is him. He doesn't know how to, because that's not how we've been socialized. We've been socialized to accept this treatment. Right? The rest of the world finds it amusing We've learned to take it. And what Black women teach their daughters is this is how you need to be. Right? This is what we learn. So this type of emasculization is highly problematic. But this is what we've known. Right? So let me go ahead and put Helen back up. Here we go.
I have two actually contentious claims today, and that is the first of them, that feminization is not just an interesting new development that has had some pluses and minuses. It's that feminization, in the case of many important institutions, is a bad thing. In a few cases, it is so bad as to be, to threaten the end of civilization. The rule of law, for example, is a very important thing. It's also very fragile. It requires a deep commitment to objectivity and clear rules, even when those rules yield an outcome that is not nice. I do not want judges who are more interested in context and relationships than in what the law says. Academia is the one part of—
Now that's important. That is important. I want her to restate it. So let me see if I can get that.
The law says.
Okay, hold on.
I do not want judges who are more interested in context and relationships than in what the law says.
I understand the importance of that. And this is another way that Black people in general have experienced this much earlier than whites. If you, especially in the 1930s, right? If you were a Black male who was accused of something and you were taken to court, especially if it was something that might lead to a lynching, one of the things you experienced in that courtroom was a feeling of agreement by those in the room, right? Who saw you as less than, who saw you as a beast. There was an agreement amongst them as to what constituted justice. And it was nothing like how we would define it, but they got to determine it for themselves. This is what she's speaking to. Now, she's talking about it on gender terms. She's talking about it in terms of feminization, but what she's talking about is a consensus amongst a particular elite group that does not conform to anything objective, right? So in other words, you have white conservatives, you have white men who are finding themselves in environments where they are being subject to a definition of justice and right that does not include them and doesn't include anything objective or empirically, provable, right? It's a logic and a rationale and a way of being that you don't get to participate in, but you're subject to it, right? They are experiencing just a surface element of Jim Crow in a certain kind of way. Your notion of justice and right and wrong is not included in the dynamic. And now you're subject to a group of people that do not fundamentally see you as human. When my son was in elementary school and I would go sit in his classes, he would often have white female teachers. They did not see his humanity. They saw him as a problem. But when little white children did the same things he did, it was cute. They could register it as human because they'd seen it. They were familiar with it. They grew up with it. Hell, their children did it. But when it wasn't something they could, that they could naturally connect with, they saw it as a problem. They saw it as errant. They saw it as disagreeable. It took away from the class, so on and so forth. They could not identify with it. This is what we're starting to experience on gender terms. And it's been happening on such a wide level, but it started out so subtle and soft and snowballed from there, like a frog, being boiled. We've all heard of that experiment, right? Set a frog in regular temperature water and turn the heat up. We all sat in it. We felt it boiling, but nobody knew what to do. And most particularly, white men didn't know what to do. White men have no problem opposing any other group of people, but when their women started to stage this kind of coup of feelings, as I'm calling it, they did not know how to handle that. And they still don't. They really still don't. It's one of the reasons that the red pill is still not as large as it could be. It's having an influence, don't get me wrong. But one of the forms of resistance that it deals with are white men in particular that do not know how to oppose and challenge the women that they live on. Their husbands, their wives, their sisters, their mothers. And really, no group of men does. No group of men is really prepared. And this is one of the reasons I think this was ran on us first in terms of the Black community. And this happened most particularly after the Civil Rights Movement, or during, so to speak, and caused its demise. Because no group of men is prepared to have its women turn on them. Conditioned to see men as the enemy and turn on them. Nobody is. So in and of itself, we're even at the forefront of crafting some of this language. Even going back to the 70s, listening to pimps, like we pulled from every different circle in the Black community as men to make sense of this and define how to respond to it. We pulled from everywhere because we had to, but we had to do it first. When you look at the rise of the manosphere, right, it really, especially amongst white men, they pulled from Black men's experiences and responses. Because for them, it was like, what the hell is this? But 20, 30 years prior, we were dealing with it. This game was run on us first. And we responded to it, and we're still responding to it. We have no choice. But most men in any environment are not prepared to fight their women. And the women deal with this. Look, the women go into this knowing that that's the case. You ever have a woman that wants to get physical with you? You notice how she knows who to get physical with and who not to? Especially if you got a career, if you got an education, you got stuff to lose and you can't afford to go to jail for, dealing with this woman physically in front of you, but she knows that and she's going to do it anyway. I used to see even going through K through 12 through college, I used to see these women that would be like 5'1" and they'd be calling out 6'3" men and trying to fight them in the street at a club or a party or even in school. And it looked ridiculous, and it was. But this was the thing I found interesting about it. He would not fight back. She would puff her chest out and walk away like she did something. And then she would talk mess and call him a bitch. And I noticed this. It got to the point where they actually believed that they were superior to their men, even physically. It never seemed to dawn on them that the reason men didn't respond was because they didn't want to suffer the consequences of doing so, of treating her like a man. Now, there's a certain class of men that will do that and have no problem going to jail for it, but those are not the men that many of these women start fights with. What I'm saying here is there's a sense that these women have invested in for a long period of time where they know men are not going to respond. This is what emboldens them. This is what increases the entitlement. They'll throw things at you, get physical with you, hit you, because that doesn't even look, when you start looking at the data around abuse, there's enough of it there for us to see parity, for us to see bidirectionality in abuse. But the reality is most women don't consider what they do abuse. If she comes at you with a baseball bat or throws a vase at you or punches you in your face, she doesn't consider that abuse, even if she initiated it. Now, one, that's because emotionally, if they're upset at you, they consider the first blow being whatever you did to upset them. That's the first thing. But two, even in regard to abuse, they're socialized, as are we, to interpret abuse as only what happens to women. So if you put hands on her, that's abuse. If she puts hands on you, she was justified. And other women will do this as well. I used to show this little video. I think it was ABC. It was one news channel that did these, fake performances where they had actors walking around a city. And you guys have seen this on YouTube, right? This from the last 10, 15 years, where if a guy will perform abusing a woman in public and men will come from everywhere to put hands on him to protect her. But a woman would perform abuse against a man and people would either ignore it or they'd laugh at him. Even the other men, they would laugh, right? But the thing, when they started interviewing the people to ask about why they acted the way they acted, the women wouldn't take female abuse seriously most of the time. Most of the time, they didn't take it seriously. And of course, the men didn't, right? But the women didn't either. They didn't take it seriously at all. And one of the things they would say most often is he did something. Usually they considered it infidelity, right? When they were interviewed in large numbers, the response was he must have done something and he probably cheated on her. Subtext meaning she was justified in whatever she chose to do. She was justified in doing. When I would post videos and articles about women killing men, attacking men, brutalizing men, women used to come in the comment section and say, I wonder what he did. I read an article that took place in Britain where it was a white couple, middle-aged white couple. And she boiled water with sugar in it and poured it all over her husband. And the skin, sloughed off his muscle. The first reactions I got from women in the comment section was, I wonder what he did. That is never a question when males brutalize females. It's never, I wonder what she did. Because going back to the 60s, the argument was that that was a form of deflection that dehumanized women and trivialized their experiences to suggest that she had something to do with it. But they never had a problem doing that with men, and they still don't. I'll give you another example. Take you back to my Facebook page. I want you to see something. Let me find it. I think it's yeah, there it is. All right. Check that out. You broke my heart. Pastor's mistress who ran anger management clinic kills lover after he refused to leave his wife. Now she learns her fate, right? The Tennessee jury has delivered its verdict in the high-profile case of Latasha Daniels, a mental health and anger management counselor involved with Pastor Broads Perry, leaving the public waiting to see what her fate will be. Prosecutors say Daniels drove from Arkansas to confront the Memphis pastor after he tried to end their relationship, then shot him multiple times while screaming, "You broke my heart," before turning the gun on his wife, who survived. During her testimony, Daniels described a years-long affair filled with manipulation, secrecy, and emotional control, one she claimed began under the guise of counseling. Now, these types of articles would be the ones to generate what I told you earlier. Women's responses would always be either, "I wonder what he did," or if it was confirmed that he cheated, even if it was silent, there was this kind of nodding like, yeah, it was justified, or at the very least understandable, right? I would experience this in my classrooms when I would pose these kind of questions to students, and much of the time the female students would kind of nod like, well, he shouldn't have cheated on her. Say, okay. Well, let me ask you this. Woman cheats on her boyfriend. They have a long distance relationship. He finds out. He gets in a car, drives to her, shoots her. You know what the reaction was? Oh my. That's he needs to get the chair. This would take place literally 2 minutes after covering a case like this, where they were indifferent to what his experience was, even if he died. But if she was on the receiving end of it, that was it. And this is more than just these individual women's interpretation. This is how they've been conditioned. This is how we've all been conditioned. Because remember, by the time we start hearing about abuse, especially when we started seeing movies on it in the 70s, it was always abuse was defined as what men did to women. That was the sole definition of it. We didn't learn to process it any other way. And that in and of itself was rooted on a much older tradition of women being delicate and soft. Women have weaponized this Western idea of female fragility against men. And so you're kind of caught in a double binary. Like you're caught in this rock and a hard place. If you respond, you're an abuser and a misogynist. If you don't respond, she gets to push her agenda, which is usually about control. Even in an individual couple, if she can continue to put hands on you and you won't do anything, let alone not even call the police, and in a certain period of time, the police wouldn't do anything, right? She's conditioning you to accept her abuse and accept her control, because at the end of the day, she knows she can do whatever she wants, and you won't be able to do anything about it. Now, if you respond back physically, you're going to get locked up. And so men can see that easily. We can see that rock in a hard place. Women act like they don't. And we'll turn around and talk to her girlfriends like, girl, I got him in check. He doesn't mess with me. He knows I'll do this and that. As if men are afraid of you physically. You see people really convince themselves that this is what men are afraid of, that they're afraid that this woman is going to beat him up in a straight up toe-to-toe fist fight. And I'm like, this is interesting. You are 5'1", 115 pounds. And you're talking to men who are 250 pounds and acting like they're afraid of you because you throw hands. It's interesting to see, but this is how far we've gotten. And these things have become normalized. And when men respond and treat women like men, I will say this. On several occasions, I've shown videos where men finally snapped. Whether they body slammed her or put hands on her, they snapped. And by snapped, I simply mean they decided to treat her like a man. The very first response I noticed from the women in the situation is a look of shock. And it's not a look of shock shocked just because they got hit or whatever it was that took place. It was a look of shock that, in my humble opinion, I interpreted as, they've convinced themselves that a reality exists. And when there is a clear cut, no way to reinterpret the fact that you have imagined yourself into a situation that does not exist, the shock of being confronted with reality was almost inconceivable, right? Almost inconceivable when a boyfriend or husband that you kind of thought you had under your thumb picks you up off the ground. You'll see a look on their faces of utter shock and fear. Now, obviously, there's a fear of being hurt, but I think there's also a fear that's a response to reality and how that reality doesn't conform to what they've imagined to be true. Yeah, as Washington calls it, it's a reset. But the reality of it is most men know better to do that than to do that because the repercussions are too great. They're too great. So most men don't do it. I'm not about to go to jail and live in my mama's garage because you're unhappy in the moment. No, not doing all of that. I worked too hard to get here, but she knows that I've worked too hard to get here. She knows that you've worked too hard to get where you are. And you'll have certain types of women that'll push that against you because they can. And here's the thing. Even if she goes and if you call the police and she gets arrested, how many times have we seen her out the next, within an hour or two? Even cases that have involved murder, the judgments are light. We've known for over 15 years that women basically experience about 65% less sentences for the same crimes as men. And that was 15 years ago or so. I haven't followed it to see what it is now, right? But that was then. They didn't really, I show you case after case of women being abusers, attackers, murderers, rapists. When all of us have been conditioned to know that the repercussions for her are going to be a slap on the hand, the repercussions for you is going to be serious jail time. Most men don't even want to deal with that. And this is why you have Scott Galloway's in place, because now something is happening across class and across race that women didn't anticipate, feminists didn't anticipate, society didn't anticipate. Men are walking away. They found it to be the most effective response. I can't afford to be out here arguing with her, fighting with her. She doesn't want to see things from a different vantage point, and there's no incentive for her to. She's incentivized to continue to operate in this imaginary social bubble she's created that she and other women can reinforce when they engage each other. So what men have started to do is walk away. They've started to not participate. Now, this is scaring people, but not as fast as it needs to. And this is why Scott Galloway is pushing the agenda as far as he can. I'm not saying everything Scott does is bad. I disagree with a number of things that Scott argues, but I do understand part of what he's doing is he's trying to tell white liberals, most particularly women, you're not ready for the repercussions of a manless society. You think you are, but you're not. And it's happening faster than you think. And if we don't get on top of it now, it's going to snowball in a way that you are not prepared for. This is what Scott is saying. He's ringing the alarm. He's Paul Revere. He's trying to tell them this shit is almost, it's almost past the point of response. And it may already be. But he's really trying to shock them into addressing it. And I give him credit for trying, but I think, the way he's going about it isn't going to really yield anything. But the walking away is serious, and this is where we are. What many of these women are essentially trying to do, since I know most of you are comic book heads, or at least a good number of you have been at some point in your lives, they're trying to build Themyscira. This is what they're trying to do. But the interesting thing is that they're not really trying to build it. What they want to do is they want to take what men have built and turn it into Themyscira rather than building something from the ground, right? They just want to take what men have actually developed and take it over because they believe they can do it better. This is what they're trying to do. But one of the things I find very interesting, even in the comics about Themyscira, is those women were stuck in a culture that was thousands of years old and it hadn't advanced at all. From whatever day they partied with the rest of the Greeks, they were still at the same level of technology as they were a few thousand years ago because they were immortal Amazons, right? Yeah. shooting bows and arrows and throwing spears. They were at the same, they stopped. They literally, the moment they separated from men, they literally stopped. And this is purely in the context of imagination we're talking about. But the Themyscira idea is one that I see being championed, but it's frozen in time. You can contrast it with Wakanda, right? Where, Wakanda is this imaginary African space, but at least it's technologically advanced. Themyscira is stuck thousands of years ago. And this is what I see. So even in the imaginary, it still doesn't work. But nonetheless, let's get back to it. Helen Andrews, here we go.
Academia is the one part of our society that's supposed to be about finding and transmitting the truth. If it instead becomes about censoring ideas that are dangerous or threatening, then it no longer serves its purpose. In business, if the only way to advance at your company is to behave in the most HR compliant way possible, that's going to exclude and discourage the very people who are most likely to be leaders and innovators. I happen to think that the most important political issue in America today right now is immigration, and that is a perfect example of a political issue where the elite consensus is highly feminized. We have all of these laws on the books about citizenship and borders, but we're not allowed to enforce any of them if it might make somebody sad. So rule of law, pursuit of truth, borders, innovation. Without these things, I am not being hyperbolic when I say that a thoroughly feminized civilization will set itself on the road to collapse. So that is the first.
Or being conquered by another group that doesn't care about its values. Right? That's the other part of Themyscira nobody wants to say out loud. The reality is, the moment there's a reason to take it over, another society will. Quickly. Yeah, I might talk about that more if I do decide to cover the Woman King. I've already covered the Woman King, but like I said, I didn't do a live showing of it. But we actually, when I covered the Woman King, the response to it, I actually talked about the historical reality of women on the battlefield at that time and what that resulted in. It's worse than you think.
First claim, that feminization is in many cases a bad and a threatening thing. The second claim proceeds from a question, and it's a very important question. Can we have demographic feminization in the literal sense without having substantive feminization of the kind that I believe is so dangerous? That is, can we have more female lawyers and judges and academics without having, or while still maintaining the old standards? Because in theory, of course, you can imagine such a thing. There certainly are enough women, there certainly are many women who have the talent and the inclination to meet the old standards. There are many women who are excellent judges. I know many female journalists who are just as hard-nosed and uncompromising as any of their male peers. There definitely are such women,
right.
But I am not sure that there are enough of them. Because the question is not, can some women be excellent professors? The question is it possible to have an academia that is majority female and is still as committed to, and still respects the unhindered pursuit of unpopular truths as much as the old predominantly male academia did? I believe the answer is no. I believe demographic feminization does inevitably lead to substantive feminization.
I once attended a statewide union meeting of professors, and it was majority female, right? Majority female. And on the second, or I think it was the second, I think it might have been the third day of the meeting, which is basically a big conference. They were convening to make decisions, to vote on particular positions that the union should have. And this is something I'd never quite seen before. I never had the opportunity to see, but I'd say it was 80% female. No, it might have been closer to 90, but anyway, right? As they were trying, each decision, each issue that was put on the table, they had to vote on. Now, in terms of the numbers, they just needed a majority. They weren't even counting. They were just looking at hands, and it was pretty quick. It was pretty casual, but as long as you had a majority, that was enough. So every issue that came up, this is what would take place. They would bring up the issue. They would ask for a vote. They would get a majority that agreed, right? So these are women bringing up the issue. These are majority women responding. They would always, none of them at any point in time ever opposed the issues brought to the table, right? The women brought the issues, the women in the audience agreed. If there was a subsection of people that didn't agree, say 5 to 10%, usually around 5, they would not move on to the next issue until everybody agreed. It wasn't required. The vote only required a majority, but they had to have unanimity. It had to be everybody, right? And often what it would come down to is one or two men that would pose a rational response and say, this doesn't work for X, Y, and reasons. I should have took notes on what the issues were. I was so caught off guard. I didn't expect it to happen. And I wasn't, I just kind of went, I wasn't thinking about anything really. So I'm sitting in there just kind of casually watching, but I noticed issue after issue after issue. It had to be unanimous in order for them to move on. And the only time it was not is when there were one or two men that were opposing what was being argued, and everybody in the room would look at these two men like they were monsters. And they fought with those men on every issue, trying to get them to agree. And when they finally couldn't, they'd finally move on to the next issue. But they would try for at least 20 minutes to try and get unanimity. They wanted everybody in a court. And it was interesting to me. And, this is why what she's talking about reminds me of that, right? Because it wasn't really as much about the issues. It was about how everybody felt about the issues. Was anybody hurt by what was being proposed? Did anybody feel bad about it? But when men felt bad about it, they were monsters, unless they conformed to the dominant opinion in the room and did so, performing it in this kind of, this kind of performative softness, this, performative identification. Have you ever seen, you see this as a kid when you see your mother engage in another grown woman, and it's even more apparent if you get to see it take place in like an all-white community, middle-aged women. But the point is, you see it. I'd even see it amongst my grandmother and how she would interact with other women. There's a performed kind of engagement. There's a way that women communicate with each other, and you can mimic it. You'll never be wholly received as a man, but you can mimic it, and that's what they were waiting for these men to do. And any man that did would kind of be patted on the head. But the men that opposed it, they often would have rational reasons, and they would often break out data to explain their positions. But as long as the room didn't feel like it, it didn't matter how much data they presented. It really didn't matter how much data they presented.
It is a difficult thing to confront, but I genuinely believe it to be true. So what does that imply? What should we do about it? I hasten to make clear that I do not propose to ban women from any field or even to discourage them from pursuing their goals as far as their talents and ambitions will take them. I don't think we have to do anything as crazy as that. The only thing that I propose, and I think all that is necessary to solve the problem, is to take our thumb off the scale.
Yes.
Because right now, in ways that many people don't quite appreciate, there is a thumb on the scale in favor of women.
Now, to be clear, this is one of the reasons that we have the black male political agenda, because we're trying to find policies that ease that thumb off the scale. Now, the other problem with this whole thumb on the scale idea is that we know it's been happening for years, and it's definitely been happening in the black community, but we've been gaslit. And this is one of the reasons that I think about 12 years ago, I kind of stopped engaging women about my research questions, because I found that they were a bit disingenuous about it. Even when presented data, even when I would present data, they would ignore it. The biggest critiques I get on my channel from women, it's never what I've said. I've never been quoted by a woman who was upset with me about my show or about something I published. It was always about the title or the thumbnail, but most of the time it was somebody that was considered rude in the comment section, as if I know everybody and we're all tight and we all grew up together in the same house and we all feel and think the same way. That's how they were treated. But most of the time when I've talked to women that had a profound frustration with my work, they couldn't tell me what I ever said. They couldn't tell me what I did. They couldn't tell me what I wrote. They would say, well, you had somebody in the comment section that hates women. And that's it. It was never about what I said. It was about how they felt about what I said. And this is what she's speaking to. What happens when you have your governing institutions that function like that? Well, one of the first things that happens is they operate on their own behalf. And they, just like the teachers I brought up earlier in regard to my son in early elementary school, it comes down to, feelings, yes, but feelings in relation to those they identify as human, those they can connect with. Those are the ones that get empathy. Those who are not a part of their social framework are less likely to get empathy, right? So if you have white women in positions of authority, guess who gets the most empathy? Other white women. And then it works backward down the scale, right? Other groups of women who are not white get less and less empathy. Usually that list ends with black women, but they get more empathy than men, right? And the scale goes from there. White men will get a certain level of empathy, and other groups of men get even less, with black men at the very bottom. White women can be profoundly cruel when it comes to making decisions about black men. A lot of it has to do with who they identify with. If you've grown up with certain people, this is why we push for impartiality. We push for objectivism. We push for it, at least theoretically, because if it's solely based on how I feel or what's subjective, then the people that I can identify with, the people that make sense, their experiences make sense to me, they're going to be the ones to benefit more than anybody. Everybody else is going to get a sliding scale of justice. And this is what she's critiquing. But this is something we've lived long before, as she put it, the last 5 years, right?
The most important example, of course, is anti-discrimination law. It is illegal to have too few women employed at your company. If women are statistically underrepresented in your institution, that is a lawsuit waiting to happen. So companies and institutions give jobs to women that they would not otherwise have gotten, give women promotions that they would not have otherwise gotten, and in a pinch, they create jobs that did not need to exist, involving PowerPoint slides, just to get their numbers up. This is why HR departments exist and why they promote gender diversity so assiduously, not because they're ideologues, although they are, obviously, but because they are protecting their company from lawsuits. Anti-discrimination law also mandates that the culture of every workplace be feminized. Because if the atmosphere of your workplace is too brash or competitive or combative, that is also a lawsuit waiting to happen, because it is an indication that your workplace is not sufficiently welcoming to women. That is why HR departments are so zealous about policing every interaction and every communication and making sure none of it has any rough edges. So that's agenda item number 1. Get rid of all the HR ladies. Who's with me? Just fire them. Damn. And then we'll see how it shakes out. If your company has too few women, that might indicate that you have a problem with your recruiting pipeline. On the other hand, it might not. Either way, we're not going to send a team of lawyers after you to second guess you. It's funny, HR departments are always so careful about making sure the atmosphere at the workplace is welcoming to women. I wonder if they ever considered that maybe their soggy, conflict-averse, nicey-nice atmosphere might not be welcoming to men.
Damn. That is, as we call it, a bar. Damn. I actually never in my life thought I'd hear a white woman talk like that. At least one in public. I've met a couple that'll talk like this, like one-on-one, but who would get on a panel at a major event and say this with data. That was a bar. I give her that. She's killing it. She's killing it.
The other thumb on the scale, obviously, is the two-income trap. Women pursue careers because they have to for their families to attain a middle-class standard of living. If we address that through various other policies to make it possible for families that want to have one earner to do so, I think the problem of feminization will subside on its own as individuals make different choices based on what's best for their own families.
Now, this is interesting, what she's saying. If we equalize the field, if we get rid of certain, what she's talking about, people, but also certain institutional practices, it'll even out. Right? It'll even out. Well, this isn't too dissimilar from Trump. I mean, I think Trump, some of the things he's been doing as far as, and I think he's actually kind of participating in what she's describing in some respects. The subtext to that is it will even out. I mean, if you take away some of the benefits that women have been able to enjoy, often at the expense of men, you don't necessarily have to give men those benefits. You just let it equal out. And I think that's kind of what we've been seeing in this kind of right wing, if we look at it as a pendulum, right? This right wing wave going back the other way. You don't really see them giving men explicit advantages the way we've seen women get them over the years. They're just kind of removing the benefits and letting things wash out the way they are. Even black men who, whether you're on the right or the left, There are many Black men that I've run across, some of them who are deeply on the left, who are looking at some of these things and they're not upset about everything. Let's get it clear. They're not upset about everything. Women have run across, if Trump comes up, and they'll often bring Trump up, they're frothing at the mouth. They can't wait. They'll talk about wanting him to die. I run across men on the left, and they may be passionate about, some of the things that he's doing that they don't like. But when it comes to this whole question of advancement, of access, more often than not, those same men will just kind of be like, like, for example, when the Fearless Fund was taken down in court, right? And this whole question of Black women being able to get grants that they mainly created for themselves, Black men were not walking the hallways crying that was taken away. We really weren't. Black men, for the most part, weren't cheering about it. They weren't throwing, parties and parades, but they weren't crying about it either. It was a lot of indifference, and that's really what I'm saying. Some of the things that the right are doing right now, you got men, Black men, even on the left, that are indifferent as it relates to this gender issue, because we noticed when it was happening to men, nobody gave a damn. Most particularly when it's happening to Black men, nobody gives a damn. So whether you're on the right or the left, many of us can become extremely indifferent when you start to see the scales balancing the other way in terms of gender.
That's just my prediction. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's get rid of the two-income trap and give people the choice, and then we'll see what happens. In conclusion, feminization is a sensitive topic. I am acutely aware of the sensitivities because I am, of course, myself a woman. I very much enjoy being a writer, and I would never want to discourage another woman from pursuing the path that I have followed. On the other hand, I am also someone with a lot of disagreeable opinions. So if society becomes more conformist and less welcoming to ideas that are controversial or unpopular, I'm also going to have a hard time of it. The important thing to remember is that it's not about what's best for me personally. It's about what's best for the society I live in and the society my children are going to grow up in. So my final exhortation to all of you is that we should all consider this difficult topic unselfishly, not from the perspective of what's to our individual advantage, but from the perspective of what's best for all of us. Thank you.
So she's dropping bars all the way through. Let's just at least admit that. Yeah, she's dropping bars all the way through. Now, I'm going to check out a little more of her work. And like I said, I think in my next show, I'm going to deal with Scott, but I'm going to deal with Scott Galloway from a vantage point of feminization. I'm going to kind of use that to kind of measure the value of what Scott Galloway is presenting. Right? Because he talks about feminization and as an upward incline of advancement that women need to be applauded for having. But he doesn't really deal with how it works at the expense of men. He just talks about it in terms of how men need to work harder, but they need more empathy. But he almost kind of blames men. Appreciate that, ghetto user. He kind of blames men for that. Right? But so I'm going to deal with that soon. But there's a couple things that she kind of reminded me about just in the last few minutes of what she was talking about. When I was thinking about, this whole question of feminization, after I watched the first video I saw from her, I have this listserv of movies that I just let play sometimes. It helps me think. And I noticed even the first 3 random movies I watched were participating in feminization. And I realized, that for the most part, I've been calling this out for years, but films and programs, as media programming goes, has been conditioning us to accept this feminization process, all the way through. I think I just watched, it was 3 animated films that came on, and one was like Storks, and it was The Secret of Nim, and it was Superman Red Sun. And at each moment, each juncture, as I'm sitting, because I'm just letting it play in the background and I'm thinking about it, and I'm kind of jotting down some notes, and I'm really starting to explore this idea around feminization and how it relates to the Black community, how the Black feminization process differs, and how it operates more quickly and earlier than what we started to see on a large scale with white women. As I'm watching this, these movies are playing in the background, and each one of them foregrounds women in some kind of way, right? At the expense of men. we've seen this for years. Smarter, better, more capable, physically superior, you name it. I'm watching this. Now, Secret of NIMH is an older flick, so they didn't kind of come with the Mary Sueism, but, amongst these intelligent, hyper-intelligent rats that are mastering technology, there's a female, the only one that there was like 2 in the whole movie, and she's able to master magic in this way. And so I'm thinking about this as a child. I used to watch films like Secret of NIMH. It took me years before I could really qualify what it is I'm seeing, where this subtle idea of female superiority has been introduced since childhood. And it went through stages. It wasn't as brash. I mean, if you watch movies and TV shows in the 70s, at that time, they were just trying to introduce girls in the male spaces. They really didn't care about boys and men and women's spaces outside of a romantic framework. But I realized how long this has been happening, how we've been conditioned to accept it, to the point where it became brash, and it was almost surprising that we've accepted it. And so after watching Helen for the first time, these movies popping on, I'm seeing more of it. And y'all know I've been talking about it for years, but it was interesting to apply it institutionally, which we were already doing. But I like some of what she's adding, so I'll probably look at whether or not it adds to our arguments. The fact that the discussion is happening on a broad scale is adding enough in terms of us being able to participate in that dialogue. But it really got me thinking on a couple levels. The other thing it made me think about is how long I've been kind of witnessing feminization. Give you an example. Mid-90s, late 90s, I think, I started to notice little things in my academic environment. This is going to sound real weird. But I remember when I started to hear people make declarative statements with an interrogative ending, meaning they started to speak in questions. And this was mostly women. But I noticed men started to do it as well. Soft toned, but they'd make an argument almost as an apology. Trying to think of a good way to kind of term it. But they're declarative statements and they end on a question mark. So, they'd make an argument like, well, I kind of think that maybe, if we tried a different way, and the shit used to annoy the fuck out of me. It really couldn't. But what I didn't realize I was seeing at a very early stage is the feminization of debate and dialogue in academic spaces, right? And what Helen talks about, like as opposed to opposing ideas and debate back and forth, which was much more oppositional, it became almost apologetic. I almost have to apologize that I have a difference of opinion, and I have to say it in a soft kind of way that makes people feel comfortable, and I have to end it on a question because to be passionate and firm about an argument you're making is inherently offensive. So this whole kind of notion of speaking in questions I've been seeing for the longest, but I did not really connect it to a transformation in the space, a transformation of the culture in the space, right? The way in which we interact and deal with each other. I didn't notice it that way. And then I started to pay attention to how some of the things that I'm seeing happening on a large scale are very much the same things I've experienced from individual women, right? Like by the time we get to cancel culture, which reaches its zenith with Me Too, right? It's really just a glorified silent treatment. It's the same thing. We're just seeing it applied on a collective level. But every time I've been in an argument and, she gets mad and doesn't speak to you for a few days, that's essentially what cancel culture is. It's a societal silent treatment, Or when you deal with, like what I've witnessed, even at the college level, the way women fight with each other, it's seldom hands, seldom physically, a lot of reputational harm. I know Jordan Peterson has talked about this for years. But yeah, it's a lot of reputational harm. Well, that's one of the things I started noticing happening to men on a larger scale. False accusations being made that couldn't be proved and didn't require evidence, but nonetheless involved reputational harm. These are tactics that I saw individual women practicing that I never imagined would be practiced on a larger scale. And yet, it's become the norm that they be practiced on a scale. As a matter of fact, it's reached a point with cancel culture where even if there's no evidence whatsoever, and you're not about to go to jail or be brought into a court of law, People can hate your guts and decide you're a monster, with no law enforcement involved whatsoever. That kind of reputational harm can destroy your life. You see how many of these actors and comedians have to take a decade before they can come back and work again, And it's the same kind of thing I used to see, girls doing in elementary school. If they didn't like somebody, especially another girl, they start talking bad about it. It's the same kind of thing. So I'm seeing these practices taking place on a larger scale, but it goes back to what Helen Andrews is talking about. She's saying that essentially the feminization of the space is the incorporation of not only the positive in women's values, but the negatives. She talked about care, and she talked about, having empathy, but there's the other side to that too. There's the shadow side of that: reputational harm, silent treatment, psychological and emotional abuse. Those practices are part of this feminization process as well. And this is what I think Black men are more willing to engage in, these dialogues about transformation of the space, the transformation of social spaces. Shout out to Dr. Thunder. What's up, man? There's a willingness to talk about the shadow side, because many of us have experienced it. And if you've experienced it as a lone male, or a very few males in a family full of women, you've seen the dark side of feminization. But there's just never, one, you didn't have the vocabulary for it, and two, there was no space to discuss it. And if you tried to discuss it, you were dismissed. You're not a serious thinker. And if you're in the academy, you're not a serious scholar, or you're just a misogynist. Those are the classifications for you if you bring up these uncouth ideas, right? But now that Helen Andrews has brought it up, now you can have a conversation about it. But as she pointed out, only to the extent that you support it. But if you have questions about it, you're still viewed negatively. Right? You're still viewed negatively. And something Washington RL is saying right here, he says, I'm feared. For Black men, this is probably one of the most consistent, judgments against Black men I've heard in the workplace and a number of other places in public. It's incredible. It's incredible how much white women in particular, but women in general, have been able to weaponize fear and the potential threat to control men, and Black men in particular. It's amazingly effective, and they know they're doing it, and they have a legacy of doing it. And we've not learned how to challenge it yet, because again, most men have not figured out how to deal with not only female evil, but women directly acting poorly. Check this out, for example. I don't know if I'll show the whole thing. I think it's like 6 minutes long, so I'm not going to do that, but here. Let me see here.
People like.
All right. Yeah. So check this out. This is a Black judge attacked by a racist woman in courthouse parking lot.
People like you always try to take what isn't yours. You think I'm
just
stupid?
asking you to check the sign. This is my name.
Don't man me. I know what you're trying to pull. You don't look like you belong here. You hear me?
Go ahead.
Courthouse CCTV camera hung high on the limestone wall, a tired glass eye that had watched years of nothing. At 2:43 p.m., a white SUV slid into a space near the back steps. The driver, mid-40s, pressed blouse, a folder hugged to her chest, stepped out like she owned the lot. Seconds later, a black sedan rolled into a stall marked with a small metal plate. Reserved, Judge D. Coleman. A tall Black man climbed out, jacket over his arm, leather briefcase in hand. He glanced toward the entrance, the way people do when they know exactly where they're going. She watched him the way some people read headlines, deciding the meaning before the words begin. She crossed the lane and pointed at the sign. "You can't park there," she said, loud enough for authority. "That's reserved." He looked at the plate, then back at her. "It is," he said, calm. "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "I know every judge in this building." Apparently not. Disbelief hardened to certainty. The phone came up like a badge. "I'm calling 911. He's threatening me." Her voice wobbled just enough to sound like danger over the line. Dispatch typed, "Possible aggressive male," and the clock began to move toward blue and red. In the still, wide angle of the camera, he did what experience teaches. Placed the briefcase on the hood, kept his hands where anyone could see them, gave the parking lot nothing to misread. He tried again, softer. "Ma'am, my identification is in my jacket pocket." The patrol car arrived in under 3 minutes, lights painting the courthouse columns. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the gap between the people, hearing a story that had already been told for them. "Sir, step back from the vehicle," one said. He did. "I'm Judge Coleman," he answered. "Courtroom 3. My ID. We'll sort it out. Hands visible." She pointed, as if swearing an oath. "That's him." He was yelling. The camera showed what the ear could not. The quiet. The distance. The neat choreography of compliance. Someone inside recognized it first. A bailiff burst through the doors and jogged down the steps, breath and urgency cutting through protocol. "Wait, he's the judge." "That's Judge Coleman." Everything paused. Training met truth at arm's length. The officer's shoulders lowered a fraction. The woman's color drained until apology looked like a mask that wouldn't fit. "You're the judge?" she managed. He held her eyes, not angry, just tired.
Yeah, you couldn't be angry. You can't be angry. You ever see those men that have been incarcerated for 30 years off of false accusation, and when they come out and the person is recanted, it's most often a woman. He can't be angry. He has to say, "I've forgiven her." Otherwise, public sentiment works against him. He's a big bad, especially if he's black man who's been imprisoned. And even though he was unjustly incarcerated, he's scary. And if he's mad at her, then we can't empathize for him. So he has to forgive her. Right? These are the kind of things we've been seeing for years.
In a way that reads older than the mirror. "You wanted justice," he said quietly. "Now you're looking at it." There's a kind of silence that belongs to courthouses, the hush before a verdict. It fell there, in the lot, where verdicts aren't supposed to happen. One officer cleared his throat and asked for the ID he could have taken at the start. The other studied the small metal plate on the asphalt, like it had only now learned to speak. The clip was on the internet before sunset. By morning, it had circled the country, a loop of disbelief, accusation, correction. The comments became a courtroom with no judge and no recess. "She should be charged. He pulled rank. If he weren't a judge, we'd be hashtagging his name." Cops followed protocol. Protocol to what end? Official statements arrived, scrubbed and careful. An unfortunate misunderstanding. We value safety. We're reviewing procedures.
Okay. So basically you get the idea. So he's a judge parking in a space that has his name on it. She decides he doesn't belong there and calls the police. But she doesn't say he doesn't belong here. He's parking in the wrong space. She says he yelled at me and I feel threatened. Right? Cops come out, pull guns on him. Many of us have lived these kind of situations. That's why I have no problem playing videos, even if they're skits or AI. If it speaks to a real experience that many black men have had, I'll play it. Not in the sense that we have to take this individual case as everything, but just to point to a phenomenon. I think this one was real. I don't think it's AI. But the point I'm getting at is this is something that many of us have experienced as black men. She was able to weaponize her fear of him. But notice when it started, she wasn't afraid of him. She was angry, right? She used fear to manipulate law enforcement. I call it blue leashing, especially, anyway. But she used fear. She used vulnerability, right, to threaten him. So here you have this judge going into his courtroom, and he has to basically cater to her emotionalism. He has to cater to her manipulation simply because she's able to do it. That's it, right? So anyway, Just wanted to kind of point that out. This is what we're dealing with when we talk about feminization. We're also talking about the weaponization of the shadow side of women's behavior, not just the positives. And I give Helen Andrews credit. I think she implies the shadow as well. She just didn't name them in that particular presentation, but she knows about it, and I give her credit for that. I think she pointed enough to the adverse impacts of what feminization that I have to give her credit, because I think the biggest argument she makes that I think is incredibly important in this is the ways in which we can actually dismiss empiricism and objectivity for feelings. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but it's close enough for the moment. And I think that in of itself is huge in terms of the implications for feminization. And it's one of the reasons that men have really started to come together to challenge these kind of ideas in some way, shape, or form, because we felt it moving in this direction for years. And there's been very little pushback, until men started doing it. But we also had to do it knowing that we'd be perceived as a threat. And this is why many of the men in spaces online had to hide their identities. Right? How many YouTube channels did you see where people didn't show their faces, didn't give you their real names because the repercussions were too great? They were too great. Took a long time before men started to come out and say, this is who I am, show their face or whatever, because it was too great. And women knew this. So, the weaponization of female nature is a serious problem in that regard. So that said, I thank you guys for joining me. Appreciate your presence. Hope you guys got something out of it. I want to hear in the comment section what you have to say. And if there's anything that I missed, but I'm going to continue kind of examining feminization and how it pertains to us. And most particularly, some of what I'm hearing from the politically correct manosphere, the Scott Galloways and whatnot. Anyway, so y'all have a good one. I will holler at y'all soon. Peace.